Hello, I'm Rodger Rice. I am a retired professor of sociology from Calvin University, and I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In November of 2020, the elders of my church were preparing to discuss the Human Sexuality Report, as was encouraged by the committee that wrote the report. As leader of the elders, I instructed everyone to come to our first meeting having read the report and with their reaction to it. Since I was scheduled to provide devotions for this meeting, I decided to write a devotional essay that revealed my reaction to the report. And I called it Over Scrupulosity, a Devotional Essay. A version of it I'm presenting here. It began with a reading of Romans 15, verse 1. It is the duty of us who are strong to bear with the weaknesses of those who are not strong, and not merely to please ourselves. For most of my life, I puzzled over Paul's talk of strong and weak believers. I never considered myself a strong believer. Instead, I counted myself among those weak in the faith. Why? Well, partly to avoid an attitude of arrogance, I suppose. The attitude that I'm right and you're wrong. And there were so many questions I had, and I still have, about my faith, the Reformed worldview, the confessions of the church, and even about the Bible itself. For most of my life, I've been a questioner, a seeker of answers, open to the Spirit's leading. I never considered faith all closed up in a tight box. For me, faith was living, changing, revolving, and bringing me closer, with some detours along the way, to the loving presence of God. To help me prepare for reading the Human Sexuality Report, I decided to read through the book of Romans, using Charles Williams' The New Testament in the Language of the People. It's an excellent contemporary translation of the New Testament. The copy I have is very special because it was my father's. And in the inside cover, he actually wrote, quote, "a priceless treasure chest," end of quote. My reason for reading Romans was to gain a clear overview of this lengthy letter that Paul wrote to believers in ancient Rome. But I confess I was also searching for a deeper understanding of the first chapter's apparent condemnation of homosexuality, and what Paul was really saying to these Rome believers, who were largely diaspora Jews scattered from Jerusalem and Judea to all parts of the Roman Empire at that time. They were converts from Judaism to Christ, and Paul was intent on giving them some important advice for how to live as believers in such a heathen city as Rome. While reading Romans, we need to keep in mind that Paul was a Pharisee, more precisely a Pharisee of Pharisees, and he was known as Saul. He rigidly and vigorously followed the law, the Jewish code of what was right and wrong. So much so that he pursued early Christians and even had them killed, because he was so certain about what was right, that what he was doing was God's will. He was, I would say, scrupulous about the law. One might even say over-scrupulous. Now, a scrupulous person, according to Merriam-Webster, acts in strict regard to what is considered right or proper. So an over-scrupulous person acts excessively in that regard. thought Paul. I'm certain I'm right, and no one can prove me wrong. But Christ did prove Paul wrong. On the road to Damascus, when he was in pursuit of more Christians to punish and kill, Paul met Christ face to face, and he was converted. Christ showed him that he was wrong, that he was making an idol of the Jewish law. Consequently, he made an about-face, followed Christ, and served God for the rest of his life, a true life-changing experience for him. He never looked back. He turned away from his over-scrupulosity of the law and realized he needed to loosen up, to be open to the Spirit's leading and help other over-scrupulous believers do the same. He was successful at the Jerusalem Council. See Acts 15. In many of his letters, he insisted that believers not follow the letter of the law, but its spirit. It's not what you do, but what's written on your heart that is more important. The overarching issue in Paul's letter to the Romans is Jews versus Gentiles. A we-they controversy, a setting where the in-group typically views an out-group in very negative terms. In chapter 1 of Romans, Paul talks about them from verse 18 to the end of the chapter. Them are Gentiles, perceived by Jews to be sinful in every way imaginable. In my view, Paul is giving a caricature of Gentiles as seen by Jews in Rome. It's a picture of what happens when people, any people, abandon God. At the beginning of chapter 2 of Romans, Paul switches to the personal pronoun you. You who? You Jews living in Rome who see the Gentiles around you as inferior and below you because they not only fail to obey the law, they have no law. They're lawless. Look how those Gentiles behave, the Jews of chapter 2 seem to be saying. We scrupulous Jews must insist that Gentiles must follow the law if they want to become part of the community of believers, the followers of Christ. Paul, still impacted by his powerful conversion, says to these scrupulous Jewish believers, quote, when you pass judgment on another, you condemn yourself. For you who pose as a judge are practicing the very same sins yourself. End of quote. And that's Romans 2, verse 1. So what sins here? Condemning others out of your own over-scrupulosity. Making an idol of the Jewish law. Paul is scolding you Jewish believers, not them Gentile unbelievers. It's the same charge Peter made on Paul's behalf at the Jerusalem Council. Quote, then why do you now try to test God by putting on these disciples' necks a yoke which neither our forefathers nor we could bear? End of quote. That's Acts 15:10. In Romans 14, Paul writes, make it your practice to receive into full Christian fellowship people who are over-scrupulous, but not to criticize their views. That's Romans 14:1. Who's Paul referring to as over-scrupulous? Charles Williams' footnote makes it clear. Those weak in faith. Over-scrupulosity is not characteristic of strong Christians. Those weak in the faith are believers who act in excessively strict regard for what they consider right and proper. Those who insist they are right and make every effort to demand that everyone else do the same are the weak in faith. In conclusion, I offer the following points for consideration. 1. Condemning homosexuality was not Paul's intent in Romans 1. As Romans 2 shows, his intent was to discourage an overly judgmental attitude among Jewish Christians in Rome toward their Gentile brothers and sisters in Christ. 2. Is it possible that the authors of the Human Sexuality Report and their approach to homosexuality and same-sex marriage are showing an overly judgmental attitude similar to the Jewish Christians of Rome as Paul viewed them? 3. Could such over-scrupulosity possibly be coming from weakness, not strength, of faith? But Paul would want us to receive in full fellowship anyone, weak or strong in the faith, and not criticize their views if coming from weakness. 4. This leaves me with one option: to appeal to the writers of the Human Sexuality Report to look again at what they have written, and to keep in mind the question of whether, like the Jewish Christians of Rome, they might be acting over scrupulously. I think they are. I thank you for listening. I accept you in full Christian fellowship and pray for unity in the Spirit. Thank you.